the Hollywood Unapologetic Podcast with Orlando Delbert, Filmmaking Essentials.
Today, we're taking a hard look at something, well, pretty essential for anyone thinking about filmmaking. How movies show violence.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We're going to dissect the impact of films like Natural Born Killers and A Clockwork Orange, maybe a few others too, to really try and understand what their portrayals of violence, communicate.
And it's not just about horror flicks or jump scares.
Yeah.
So we're looking outside that genre specifically.
Exactly. We're interested in how these films depict violence and what that might actually tell us. Have you ever stopped to think how a filmmaker's choice in showing, say, a fight scene could shape how you understand violence itself?
That's a great starting point. We're diving into films that have definitely stirred the pot, praised and criticized for showing what some people call ultraviolence.
Ultraviolence.
Right.
Oh, our mission today really is to get past just saying, oh, this movie is violent, and actually unpack the layers. What's the meaning? What's the impact these portrayals might have? How do these images stick with us? And what messages, maybe intended, maybe not, are they sending?
Precisely.
Okay, let's maybe start unpacking this with a film that always comes up in these discussions. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, based on the Anthony Burgess novel, of course.
A cornerstone, for sure.
When you watch it, you just can't ignore the very deliberate way violence is shown.
No, you can't. And at its core, A Clockwork Orange really exposes this tension, this conflict between like raw, almost instinctual violence, Alex embodies that, right? And the cold controlling systems of the state.
That push and pull.
Yeah, it's that dynamic that drives the whole thing and makes you really think about, well, where are the lines drawn?
And a huge part of this is that ultra-violence we mentioned. Can you maybe describe what that looks like in the film? The visual style, how it presents Alex and his gang?
Well, Kubrick, he doesn't pull punches showing the brutality, but it's often highly stylized, almost theatrical.
Right, like the slow-mo.
Exactly. The slow-mo, the weird costumes, this backdrop of decaying, but also strangely kind of vibrant, futuristic Britain.
Oh, wow.
And the Korova milk bar.
Oh, yeah, the milk bar.
With that bizarre decor, it's almost like a symbol of this twisted world where violence is almost, recreation for Alex and his droogs.
And we see Alex always trying to assert his dominance through these acts, even within his own gang.
Constantly. He has to be the leader.
Those early scenes, they definitely grab you. Like the invasion of the cat lady's home, it starts almost casually.
Yeah.
And then just escalates.
It does. It really does. And that moment, the murder with the phallic sculpture, it's a deeply disturbing image.
Yeah.
And it's the turning point, isn't it? Leads straight to Alex's capture when Dim betrays him.
Right, Dim gets him back.
And that betrayal pushes Alex into the hands of the state, which sets up the whole film's exploration of a different kind of violence, the violence of control.
Which brings us, to the Ludovico technique. Such a disturbing idea. Can you just explain what that involves? What are they trying to achieve?
So the Ludovico technique is presented as this radical aversion therapy. Alex volunteers for it, basically, to get out of prison early.
Right, he thinks it's a shortcut.
He does. So they strap him in a chair, force his eyes open, and make him watch these incredibly graphic images of violence, of sexual assault.
Horrific stuff.
While injecting him with a drug that makes him violently nauseous. And the kicker is, they use Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which Alex loves, as the soundtrack.
So the idea is to condition him through intense negative association.
Exactly. To make him physically incapable of even thinking about violence without getting sick. To make him a fit citizen.
But it's not just violence he becomes averse to, is it? That conditioning sort of bleeds over?
Precisely. It contaminates everything linked to those sessions, especially his beloved Beethoven, which just shows how blunt and indiscriminate this forced cure is.
And when they try to show off his rehabilitation.
Oh, it's deeply unsettling. He can't defend himself when an actor attacks him on stage. He gets physically ill just looking at a topless woman. It's like a complete removal of his ability to choose, good or bad.
And the prison priest, he raises a really key ethical point about this, doesn't he? What's his argument?
Well, the priest basically says that by removing Alex's ability to choose between good and evil, the state has stripped him of his humanity.
No choice, no morality.
That's the implication. True goodness, he argues, has to come from a conscious decision to be good, not from being physically unable to be bad. Without choice, Alex isn't a moral being. He's just conditioned. A Clockwork Orange.
That really gets to the heart of it. And what happens to Alex after the treatment just highlights how limited this forced goodness really is.
Right. He's thrown back into society, but he's completely defenseless. His parents reject him. He gets beaten up by the old homeless guy he once tormented.
And his old droogs, who are now cops.
Exactly. The irony. His former gang members, now police officers, assault him. It shows this cycle of violence just keeps going, even after the state tried its, cure.
Then there's that incredibly tense, uncomfortable scene when he ends up back at the writer's house. The one he crippled.
Oh, that's a huge moment. Initially, the writer doesn't recognize him.
Yeah.
Right? And he feels some sympathy when he hears about the Ludovico treatment, seeing Alex as another victim of the state.
But then he figures it out.
And that sympathy just flips into this intense desire for revenge. It really complicates everything. Victimhood, justice, who's good, who's bad.
It really does. And this seems like a good place to bring in those ideas about different kinds of violence, like from Slavoj Žižek. He talks about more than just the obvious physical stuff, right?
Absolutely. Žižek's framework is really useful here. He makes a distinction between three main types. First, there's subjective violence.
Okay, what's that?
That's the direct, visible violence, the stuff we easily recognize as violence. Alex and his gang beating people up, the rape, the murder, that's subjective violence. It's done by identifiable agents.
Right, the stuff that's right there on screen, easy to point at. So what's objective violence?
Objective violence is trickier. It's the violence that's sort of inherent in the system itself. It's often invisible, part of the normal functioning of society. Think about the social and political structures.
Like systemic issues.
Exactly. Systemic violence, the inequalities, the power imbalances that might exist even in that seemingly stable world the writer and the cat lady lived in before Alex disrupted it. Foucault talks about this too, how power structures shape subjects.
So the normal state of things can itself be violent.
Žižek would argue yes. It connects to Marxist ideas too, about exploitation baked into the system. The structure itself can perpetuate harm, which might then provoke a reaction, maybe even revolutionary counter-violence.
Okay, so subjective is the direct act. Objective is the systemic background violence. What's the third type? Symbolic violence.
Symbolic violence. This operates through language, through naming, through categorization. It's the power to impose meanings and classifications.
How do we see that in A Clockwork Orange?
Well, think about when Mr. Deltoid spits on Alex and calls him a murderer. That label reduces Alex's entire being to that one category. Or in prison, he's just number 655321.
Ah, dehumanizing him, stripping away his name, his identity.
Exactly. It's a form of control exercised through language and symbols. It shapes how we see people and how they see themselves.
It makes you think. Listener, can you spot examples of this systemic or symbolic violence in our own society? Stuff that's maybe less obvious than a punch? And what are the consequences of that hidden violence? It's worth considering.
Definitely.
So going back to the Ludovico technique, the big ethical question remains, can you actually force someone to be good? Is that even meaningful?
That's the crux, isn't it? There's an essay by Stephen M. Kahn arguing that Alex's conditioned state is actually worse than his original violent state. Because he hasn't chosen nonviolence. He hasn't accepted any moral values. He's just unable to act badly.
So if there's no free will involved, it's not really morality.
That's the argument. And Michel Foucault's ideas fit in here too. He argued that we're all constantly being shaped, conditioned by power structures in subtle ways.
So the Ludovico technique is just a really extreme, visible version of everyday conditioning.
Kind of, yeah, an intensified form. It makes visible the power dynamics that are often hidden.
That's a bit unnerving to think about, all these invisible forces maybe shaping us.
It is. And Mark Bevere adds that these normalizing effects of modern power might actually be more damaging than overt violence because they're harder to see. We might think we're making free choices, but we're actually just conforming to subtly imposed norms.
Like we're normalizing ourselves without realizing it. And fear seems like a big tool for control in the film's world, too.
Oh, absolutely. Žižek calls it post-political biopolitics, using fear to manage and mobilize the population, keep them in line for the system's functioning.
But Alex and his gang seem outside that initially. They don't seem afraid.
They seem outside it, but are they really? Their actions are still contained by the threat of the law. Think about Alex's panic when he realizes the cat lady died, or how Mr. Deltoid intimidates him with threats, even physical violence.
So even the rebels are controlled by fear of the system's power.
They operate within its shadow, yes. Which brings up the idea of counterviolence as a response to all this systemic stuff.
Right, fighting back against the system.
It can be seen as disrupting that normal order, reacting to injustice. But as the film shows with Alex's droogs becoming corrupt cops, that reaction doesn't necessarily fix anything.
It doesn't lead to real justice.
The system often just absorbs or twists the rebellion. The corruption continues.
It feels like a closed loop. This reminds me of Walter Benjamin's ideas about violence, mythic versus divine violence. How might that apply here?
That's an interesting lens. Benjamin saw mythic violence as the violence that founds and maintains law, the state's power. Divine violence, however, is different. It's law-destroying, a pure force that shatters unjust systems without setting up a new cycle of guilt and retribution.
Okay, so could Alex's initial ultraviolence be seen as some kind of maybe twisted divine violence, a response to the system?
You could ask that question. Is it a pure outburst against a corrupt order? But does it actually achieve that law-destroying goal?
Well, does it? Does it change the system?
I'd argue no, not really. His violence is disruptive, sure, but it doesn't fundamentally change the power structures. The system just adapts, pulls him back in, first through punishment, then through the Ludovico technique. It doesn't transform things in the way Benjamin envisioned for divine violence.
So it's ultimately contained. It's quite a bleak outlook, isn't it? Which leads to another question for the listener. Can art, like this film, ever be truly free of social or political messages, even when it's just showing violence, seemingly without judging? What do you think?
It's hard to imagine it being totally neutral.
So wrapping up on A Clockwork Orange, what's the main takeaway regarding violence?
I think the key insight is just how layered violence is. The film forces us to see it's not just one thing. There's the individual act, the systemic forces, the symbolic power. It makes you look beyond the punches and consider the whole context, the power dynamics, and the really difficult ethical questions about control and morality.
Really makes you think. Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's talk about another film that caused a huge storm over violence in media, Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers. Very different style.
Oh, completely different. Natural Born Killers is, well, it's a full-on satire, isn't it? Taking aim squarely at the media and its tendency to glorify violent criminals.
And it feels maybe even more relevant now with social media creating instant celebrities out of almost anything.
Absolutely. It was kind of prophetic about viral infamy.
So can you remind us about the main characters, Mickey and Mallory Knox, and that really distinctive visual style?
Right, Mickey and Mallory. They're portrayed as this almost legendary couple on a killing spree who somehow become huge media stars. And the style, it's deliberately chaotic. Sensory overload.
Yeah.
Stone uses everything different. Film stocks, jump cuts, animation. He even throws in sitcom parodies, news report styles. It creates this dizzying, media-saturated world that mirrors the very thing he's critiquing.
And the way the film focuses on Mickey and Mallory compared to their victims, that's very deliberate too, right?
Hugely deliberate. We get Mickey and Mallory's backstory, their warped romance, their image, their victims, mostly anonymous, just targets, faceless.
Plausible.
Yeah. And an imbalance is crucial. It shows how they gain notoriety through these acts, framed by the media's gaze.
So the film itself kind of mimics the media process it's attacking, focusing on the killers, making them the stars.
Exactly. Stone's arguing there's this perverse market for violence, and mass media actively builds and sells the image of killers as celebrities.
Yeah.
It creates this weird dynamic where, as some critics put it, nobody's paid to be in the proximity of the somebodies who appear by annihilating nobodies.
Wow. That's a chilling phrase.
Okay.
That our fascination feeds the cycle.
And you can stretch that idea beyond just physical violence, right? Think about corporate ladders, ruthless ambition.
Yeah.
How sometimes people gain status through the social or economic annihilation of others.
Like climbing over people to get ahead.
Sort of. The film suggests that when we consume media violence, we're not just watching passively. We're kind of validating the terms of personality or success built on that violence, however metaphorical.
So by watching, we become complicit in the system the film is critiquing.
That's the uncomfortable suggestion, yeah. Natural Born Killers portrays the media not just as reporting on the world, but as the environment itself, the new nature, where power, money, and violence are all tangled up. And this media world kind of selects for figures like Mickey and Mallory. Their extremity gets rewarded with attention.
And the violence itself is just relentless, intentionally over the top. What's the effect of that barrage?
Well, one potential effect is desensitization, right? The film almost drowns you in stylized violence. It suggests that maybe in a world so full of these images, the real horror gets lost. Mass death becomes just another spectacle.
It loses its weight.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a big tragedy feels the same as some minor personal annoyance because we're just overwhelmed by images. The film almost tries to shock us into feeling something by showing us the extreme endpoint of that media saturation.
It was incredibly controversial when it came out, wasn't it? People were really upset.
Hugely controversial. There were accusations, though, that are really hard to prove and often debated that it inspired real-life violence, like the Columbine shooters supposedly using MBK as a code.
Right. I remember hearing that.
Whether that's true or not, the film definitely hit a nerve about media influence. And even people who got the satire, who understood the point Stone was making, still found the actual content, repugnant or hard to watch over time.
It definitely leaves a mark. Which brings up another question for our listeners. How does this constant exposure to violence in media, films, news, games shape how we see real-world violence? Are we getting desensitized? And if we are, what are the implications of that? Something to chew on.
It is.
So what's the main takeaway from Natural Born Killers on this topic of depicting violence?
I think the crucial point is its sharp, unrelenting critique of the media's role. How it can sensationalize violence, turn killers into celebrities, and maybe even foster a culture where violence is consumed, maybe even inadvertently celebrated. It really pushes us to be critical consumers of media.
To think about how these stories are framed. Okay, now, just briefly, let's touch on one more film that was a real watershed moment for screen violence. Bonnie and Clyde. Came out much earlier, 1967.
Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde was a game changer. It really broke away from the sanitized violence common in American films back then, largely because of the strict Hays Code.
Right, the production code limited what you could show. So how did Bonnie and Clyde change things? What was different about its violence?
It just felt much more raw, more visceral. The director, Arthur Penn, used things like slow motion and, importantly, exploding squibs, those little blood packs, to show the actual impact of bullets.
Made it look real.
Yeah, especially in that incredibly famous, brutal final ambush scene. It was shocking for audiences used to people just sort of clutching their chest and falling over. It definitely opened the door for more graphic violence later on.
So it was a technical shift, but also a tonal one. It changed how we saw the criminals, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Clyde made its outlaws seem, well, glamorous. Young, rebellious, anti-establishment. They really resonated with the 60s counterculture. It blurred the lines between hero and villain and made audiences question who they were rooting for.
Interesting how that influenced things. Okay, so we've looked at A Clockwork Orange, Natural Born Killers, Bonnie and Clyde. Thinking about these examples, it brings up a big ethical question, especially for filmmakers, maybe those listening in the new Hollywood generation. What responsibility do you have when you put violence on screen? How do you explore these dark, complex themes without, accidentally making violence look cool or numbing your audience to its real consequences?
It's a tough balance, isn't it? There's no easy answer. Filmmakers have immense power to shape how we see things, to provoke thought. And yeah, with that power comes a responsibility to think really hard about the impact.
It certainly does. Well, as we wrap up, it's clear that understanding how violence is shown in films, the many ways it's depicted, and the potential effects on us, it's really crucial.
Absolutely. Being critical viewers is key.
And remember, as members of the new Hollywood generation, we're all navigating this complex media world together. So be safe, be smart, be great.
Well said. You can find more insights on navigating the entertainment industry and achieving success in Orlando Delbert's work, including his book, Pollyanna's Tear-Soaked Battlefields of Hollywood, a survival guide against the cynicism and the hypocritical, and of course, the Hollywood Unapologetic platform. And always remember, you are the key to your own success. You are the new Hollywood generation.
Be informed, be prepared, and most importantly, be great.
That's it. Be great. Good luck out there.
See you next time.